I'm Dennis from Zynaptiq, and we're here in Frankfurt at Music MESSE showing our newest plugin, Wormhole. What does it do? Wormhole is an otherworldly multi-effects processor. What does that mean? It's geared towards doing really far out sounds really easily at a very high quality. It doesn't just do the crazy stuff, it also does the subtle stuff like left and right detuning, micro shifting, reverbs, all that kind of stuff is included in Wormhole. Let me show you what it sounds like and what it does. So, if we could have a look at the UI, this is it. So on the top, it consists of 5 processing sections. The warp section over here on the left, the shift section over here on the right, a dual random modulated Hall reverb at the bottom, a very clever little delay on the left at the top, and effects blend on the top right. Every plugin, pretty much every plugin, has a dry-wet control. That's cool, that's very useful. However, that's not always what you want. You may want to use that to dial back the intensity of the effect, or find in-betweens and not just have it sound like 2 sounds playing at the same time. Effects Blend uses our structural audio morphing technology from our Morph plugin to do a dry, wet morph. So you get all sorts of intermediate sounds. You can wrap the effect into the silhouette of the source and really fuse them into one unique new sound. And that opens up a whole lot of new options. The second section I'm going to go into detail on is the pitch shifter. You probably already have a dozen or more pitch shifters. So why would you want another one? Well, except for that, this is the Zynaptiq one, of course. You want this one because it sounds different. Why? Well, because it works differently than other pitch shifters. Pitch shifters in the last decades have been designed in one of two, generally speaking, in one of two ways. Either using delay lines or granulators, that sort of thing, or phase vocoders, FFTs, resynthesizers, a frequency domain approach. Each of these has its strong points and its weaknesses, but both of them have rather pronounced artifacts that are typically not the type of artifact you can deal with well in a mix, depending on what you're doing, of course. Our pitch shifter uses a proprietary approach that is time domain, but has the advantages of the frequency domain approach, so that it has neither of those two artifact types. No flamming, granularization, and no warbly, fluttery stuff. It has, of course, its own weaknesses. At the end of the day, we do science and not magic. We're working on the magic bit, but we're not there yet. It can sound really good. Now, together with the dry-wet morphing, you can get really awesome sounds. For example, I can go from the dry did there was morph from the dry to the fifth. And as you'll hear, I mean, I'm not sure you'll be able to hear it on YouTube with all the noise going on here and stuff like that, but it's how the harmonics of the pitch shifted sound grow essentially out of the source. Like it just kind of invades your sound gradually and just transforms it, rather than just, oh yeah, now I hear the original, now I hear 2 sounds playing at the same time, and now I hear just the wet. Try it in the studio, it's really cool. The shift section also has a frequency shifter. Now, our frequency shifter has a near perfect sideband and carrier suppression. What does that mean? It's super clean, and it's so clean that the sidebands and the suppressed sideband and the carrier do not even show up on a spectrogram, right? They get lost in the resolution. Well, why isn't everybody doing that? Just do it cleanly. Well, frankly, I don't know, because in telecommunications, you know, for talking to satellites and Pioneer 5 and stuff like that, it's a well-known thing of how to really do that kind of stuff cleanly. But as far as we know, this is the cleanest one currently available. The pitch shifter, what I forgot to mention, has a very wide range. It has a ±4 octave range. It also features four modes. There's the tight and the smooth modes. I think you can figure out what that means for the audio. And then there's 2 detune modes that do the micro shifting thing. So they'll shift one channel up and the other down in opposing directions by smaller amounts. And that can sound like butter. Now this can go from so subtle you won't know it's there to like really, really obvious. Going back to our guitar, I can really make chorus effects that aren't using the detuning. I can go really subtle on that. Or really strong. That plays together with the delay section that I'm going to go into next really well too. So what's the deal with the delay? It's not a feedback delay, tape delay, or anything like that. Nothing elaborate. Essentially, it's an evolved pre-delay. Because we figured, okay, so we're doing a multi-effects thing, it needs to have a pre-delay. Then we found a pre-delay to be very boring and useful only rarely. And then we figured out, hey man, wouldn't it be kind of cool if we kind of did the reverse thing? You know, delay the dry and leave the wet in place. So we built that. You can do that by taking the delay time to negative values. And we went like, yeah, that's more like it. Like, you know, have the reverb play before the source, things like that. And then we thought, but wouldn't it be like really cool if we could do it one way for the one channel and the other way for the other channel? Wouldn't that maybe make a really wild widening effect? And it turns out that does indeed happen. It becomes really wide, as you'd expect with a left-right delay difference for a signal. But, you know, if you do the Haas panning left-right delay thing, it gets wide, but it's also panned hard left or right, depending on what channel arrives first, which limits the usefulness of that approach in mixing. Now, with this one, as there's always a signal playing at the same time, you know, either the dry or the wet is undelayed right now, and the other, and you flip it for the second set of channels, you get the width effect, but it's dead center, which makes it way more useful. Let me show that on the guitar. Just I'll set up a fifth pitch shift so you can hear what it's doing better. Okay, here comes the regular pre-delay. Nothing to write home about. Negative pre-delay. And now I hit this button. Then there's the warp section. It's not an interplanetary spaceship propulsion device. We're still working on that.
Could it be though? Could it potentially in the future be a interplanetary?
We are looking at an upgrade path for a future product that will take you to other planets physically, but we have no specific ETA for that yet. So what does it do? Technically speaking, it's a time domain local spectrum inversion and reiteration thing. What it means is it's not an FFT-based process, so you don't get all the MP3-ish, warbly resolution issues you get from FFT spectral processors. No, it's tight and crisp and focused sounding because it's time domain. It kind of inverts the spectrum, and then you can adjust like what part of the spectrum and how. Please, this is stuff that is really better to listen to or see pictures of. We have a lot of spectrograms of what it does on the website. You can, a lot of detail there. And I'll now show you what it sounds like, because that's really the main deal. So here's a bit of speech.
As, in an interval of 3 days, the Governor Higginson and the Columbus had observed it.
And now I'm going to use just the warp section.
As, in an interval of 3 days, the Governor Higginson and the Columbus had observed it at 2 different points of the chart.
As, in an interval of 3 days, the Governor Higginson and the Columbus had observed it at 2 different points of the chart.
As, in an interval of 3 days, the Governor Higginson and the Columbus had observed it at 2 different points of the...
Yeah, I'm not hearing what I'm doing too well, so please bear with me and try it in the studio. What I hope you have heard is that it has a vague resemblance to something like a ring modulator, in that it creates this disharmonic color. And it can be very metallic, and it can be very strange, like a ring modulator. However, it produces sounds that you, in detail, will not get from a ring modulator, because it does something else, obviously. The poles parameter that I tweaked towards the end of that little presentation basically applies the process several times in series, which results in the harmonics converging around like this clustering region, and that gives it like a characteristic similar to a modal resonator. However, since it's not delay based, you don't get that extreme smearing out you always get and ringing forever thing you get with high feedback values for resonators. It stays more focused. I mean, it does wash out because that's what you want to do with that knob, but it retains a lot more definition. The warp depth parameter essentially is like, sets how much of the spectrum gets inverted. So at the minimum range, it's essentially bypassed. Then you get just high frequencies being inverted, which can give very cool lo-fi, bit crushing, sample rate reduction effects that have something to them that sounds different than your typical sample rate reduction. And as you go lower, gradually all of the spectrum is included. The warp tilt control in the middle of the UI, the big trackball thing, is it does something that's somewhere in between formant shifting and sample rate conversion and pitch shifting, and it does something that's hard to put into words, but it does kind of in general move stuff up or down, you know, and it interacts really nicely with the warp depth, so there's a lot of fine tuning you can do to like zoom in on that particular color that you're looking for. Right, then we have a great sounding reverb in there. Actually, 2 great sounding reverbs, because we figured 2 is always better than 1 when it comes to cool pieces of gear.
Of course, always.
It's what I do with my Euro rack. It's like, oh, 2 is better than 1. Yeah, and 8 is better than 2, and the whole room full is even better, but you know. So why are there 2 reverbs? It turns out that if you use the dry-wet morphing, and you have the reverb before the morph, and you're morphing from your dry source into the reverb, it will not sound like a reverb. Instead, it'll sound more like maybe a gated reverb, or like some pumping, or some, very hard to describe. It gets a very particular texture, but it doesn't sound like a reverb anymore. We figured, well, you may want to actually be able to use reverb when using the morphing. So we added a second reverb as an option that was positioned after the morphing. And we went like, yeah, that's cool, but can we have both? I went to the guys and said, can we just have a button that says both? Yeah, 2 of them? They said, yeah, why? I said, like, just do it. They did it, and it turns out that's really cool, because that way there's a lot more to play with, and even if you're not using the morphing, if you stack those 2 reverbs, which are random modulated Hall type all-pass reverbs, like the one in Morph, or the all-pass module in Adaptiver, you can get really thick and dense and complexly modulated reverb textures just by cascading too. So this is essentially the reverb in dual mode. If you use just one, or the other, or both. Now let me show you how that sounds to morph into that reverb. So using one of the two morphing modes, this is just the reverb. Start hearing this gated or dynamic quality. Using the other morphing mode, you can get all sorts of really intense sustain and density increase effects. Actually, you can use that to great effect with drums. There's in the Epic Piano and Drums example video on YouTube for Wormhole, you can hear how morphing the a drum loop into its reverb with a little bit of pre-delay can create a super wild and intense and gritty and aggressive pumping sound without actually using a compressor. It just comes up in between, because then the morphing goes like, okay, so there's no more sound at the input. Oh, but there's this stuff, this reverb, so how do I reconcile those two? Oh, let's do something. And then it comes up and it can be really crazy. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think that concludes the demo. Let me just say, it's available right now for VST 2 and VST 3. Audio units RTAS AX native on Mac and PC, 32-bit, 64-bit. The regular SRP is 179 US dollars or 199 euros, including 19% VAT. It's less than that without the VAT. I can't tell you off the top of my head how much that amounts to, but it's less. And there's an intro special running where you can get it for 149 US dollars and I think 159, 69, something like that, euros, including VAT.